Hello and welcome to the next episode of Lost on Criterion. I'm John Patrick Owatari Dorgan, and with me is a man who is a follower of the sacred gourd.
That gourd's pretty awesome.
It is. It's a very shapely gourd.
I am the Adam Glass, and it is a shapely gourd, and well deserving of our respect.
Yes, an adulation.
You know, it's not that the gourd is our god, but the gourd is a sign pointing to our god.
Like his sandals,
usually straight
too.
up from its bulbous underings up its curved stem toward heaven. I could probably expound on this for far
Please
too long.
don't. I was wondering if we were going to discuss it any further.
It will get worse and worse as I go along. This week, as he's alluded to, we were talking about the life of Brian, Monty Python's 1979 film, their follow-up to The Holy Grail, and much more of a movie than The Holy Grail.
Yes, yeah. Much more of a plot. Not just because of
the budget increase, but also the plot. It is not a loose conglomeration of sketches, though there are quite a few scenes that are really just sketches, but there is narrative.
Yeah, but they were all pretty well bound into the narrative for the most part.
Yeah,
unlike Holy Grail, which is very, very loosely tied to its own narrative.
Yes, yeah. So this is a movie that let's see. This was a decade after Jesus Christ Superstar. No, this was a decade after Jesus Christ Superstar and a decade before The Last Temptation of Christ. And it got the same sorts of condemnations from it. And I believe The Last Temptation of Christ is something we'll be watching later on.
Is that the one with Willem Dafoe in it?
Yes, okay. That is the one with Willem Dafoe. Anyway, so this is the sort of movie... and this isn't... Those other two are at least actually about Jesus.
Well, this Brian one is about Jesus.
Yes, but at the same time, Jesus in this movie is actually treated fairly respectfully. The only joke involving Jesus in this movie directly is people mishearing the Sermon on the Mount because they're standing in the back.
Yeah. Which is... It's a pretty good joke.
Yeah. Blessed are the cheesemakers.
Yeah. Why are cheesemakers? It's metaphorical.
Clearly he means all dairy producing farmers. Anyway, so but what I mean to say by setting all that up is this is the sort of movie that had a whole lot of mud slung at it by people who had never seen it, so much so that they were slinging it before it even came out.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean...
If you even make allusions to Jesus, you're going to get mud thrown at you.
Yeah. Probably didn't help that the original title was Brian of Nazareth.
Which I really like better. That's a much better title.
Yeah. It's still... It's the title used in a lot of foreign markets, actually.
Huh.
Anyway.
Now I need to know something.
After some of that initial criticism, before the movie was even on board, EMI pulled its backing out of the movie. So they had no money. And they went on a fundraising tour and still couldn't make enough money for what they needed, and George Harrison picked up the difference, eventually stepping in, he says, just because he wanted to see the movie. So he figured he should probably make it made.
Pay for it.
so that he could eventually see it. This is a movie that, on its surface, for very good reasons, appears to be a satire of Jesus, but it is more of a satire of organized religion and a satire of leftist politics, of all things.
Well,
quite a bit of satire, leftist politics, revolutionary leftism. more than
yeah, that's a major component, and not just organized religion, but also just generally the source of organized religion in general. Like, where does it come from? What is the absurd origins of it? And it's fun. It's nice that way, because you could easily apply the same... You could do the same story for insert any other organized religion, and the story would work just as well. Well, I mean, not the Gluteus Maximus jokes, but most of the other stuff would work fine.
All jokes on Latin. Probably,
yeah.
Biggest dickus. And, anyway.
All the other ones that I can't remember anymore.
Yes. So, the Pythons, rather aware that the actual theme of their movie was going to be lost, had Brian deliver it himself to his followers and immediately make a joke out of them misunderstanding it. But Brian, trying to get rid of them, tells them to just make up their own minds and work it out for themselves. And everyone immediately recognizes that that's great advice, which proves that they should be following him. And they do, in various ways. So this is a movie that we like some movies in the past, like
specifically the last
Time
movie
Bandits.
We watched, paid for by George Harrison.
Yes, like Time Bandits, also paid for by George Harrison. This is a movie that Pat and I both really love. We are its target audience, or were at least.
No, we still are.
In the case of Time Bandits, we were when we watched it, but in this, we are its target audience. We people from a Christian background who know what's going on here, but people who recognize the valid points being made as well.
People who are not going to sling mud before they watch the movie. Yeah.
So, in that regard, I think this episode's over.
Yeah. Unfortunately, our ability to critique this movie is severely hampered by the fact that we both love this movie. I can tell about the fact that I can safely say that this might be the first time I've ever finished this movie.
I've never seen the first 10 minutes.
I've never seen the last 10 minutes. I do not believe I've ever watched them sing Look on the Bright Side of Life. I'm pretty sure that every time I have tried to watch this movie, I have been cut off by people I was watching it with who got tired of it. Which, in retrospect, I don't understand. Because that was the most enjoyable 90 minutes of my life.
Yeah, this is a really, really enjoyable movie. See, the weird part is, I could actually recognize getting tired of, say, Holy Grail.
Oh, for sure.
I could see getting tired of Meaning of Life.
Well, we talk about no narrative.
Yeah, exactly. No, Meaning of Life is significantly just a string of sketches,
and that makes it harder to watch.
Yeah, but this is a good movie, and I think part of the problem with people not liking this movie is still the carryover from this "I should be offended" idea.
And I think that's the deal, is that like every time I've ever sat down to watch this, at least one person in the room was obviously displeased.
Yeah.
And even if most of the people were having fun, nobody wants to be in a situation where you even make one person unhappy in a group that you're hanging out with. And so you end up turning it off. Yeah. And so, like I said, I don't think I've ever seen the last 10 minutes of the movie. I've never seen the Suicide Squad. I can swear to God I've never seen them.
Suicide Squad is pretty great. There's some deleted scenes that were on the Criterion DVD, and the Suicide Squad plays into one of them. The leader of the Suicide Squad's name is Otto, and he comes to meet Brian earlier in the film. He is a Jewish supremacist. He is waiting for the Savior to arrive, who will get rid of all of the non-Jews in Israel. The Romans, the Greeks, the Gypsies. Brian hushes him when he says gypsies, actually. He's looking, and he's got his crack Suicide Squad to help out, willing to die anywhere at the drop of a hat. 20 seconds or less. They can all be dead.
Interesting interpretation of the term Suicide Squad.
Yes, so he decides to prove it to Brian, and everyone commits suicide. And he's talking about how great it is and how dedicated they clearly are. And he notices that they're all still alive, and there's an explanation. He gets them all up, and they explain that it was sheep bladders full of blood. They were just faking suicide, which in turn explanation for why they're tapping their feet always on the bright side of life, which is at the very end. You think dead bodies are doing it, which
I kind of like anyway.
Yeah.
I kind of like this little ditty about looking on the bright side of life is infectious enough that the dead people are tapping their toes too.
Yeah,
it lines up with a Monty Python aesthetic anyway.
Because the whole song is about how life can get you down, but even in the face of death, things can be okay. Yeah. So, it's. As they're lying there dying of their suicide wounds.
They're sitting there tapping their toes. No problem with that in this universe anyway. But
one thing, I think it was Eric Idle. It might have been Palin. I can't remember.
Nah, they're all the same.
They're not all the same. One of them's American.
They're all pasty white guys. I get confused.
So, all incredibly thin pasty.
Yeah, I know. It's really actually pretty hard for me to tell them apart.
Yes. Anyway, one of them expressed displeasure that some of the actors in that final scene were showing signs of pain on the crosses, because he felt that the entire point of I think it was Eric Idle because he wrote the song, but he had felt that the entire point of the scene, it wasn't about pain, it was about death, and differentiating between those two, and that even in light of death, you can look on the bright side of things, whereas in light of pain, it's a bit harder to look on the bright side of things. But yeah, in the controversy surrounding this film when it came out, a British talk show called Friday Night, Saturday Morning, a late night show, invited John Cleese and Michael Palin on to discuss the movie with Malcolm Muggeridge, who had been a left-leaning satirist, who the Pythons actually said they quite respected a lot of his work. He was in the process of becoming more of a Catholic moralist at that time. Was one of the first major public advocates of the work of Mother Teresa, actually, which is kind of interesting.
Wow, this is really interesting.
Yeah. Mervyn Stockwood, who was then the Bishop of Southwark, which I assume is a city in Britain, but they all have crazy names.
Right.
I don't know. Basically, the show invited them on to talk about the movie and get the religious perspective, the Christian perspective on the movie. But in that, these two gentlemen had been asked to see the movie that afternoon. So the show paid for them to go to the movie. But they arrived 15 minutes late.
Okay.
So they missed everything in this movie that establishes it takes place in a universe where Jesus actually exists. And Jesus is a pretty neat guy.
Yeah, I guess if you miss the first 15 minutes, you miss the manger. You miss...
Yeah.
The Sermon on the Mount. You miss everything that establishes him as a character, a character you don't see, but a character in the film.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, you miss the discussion with the leper, who's actually a bit peeved at Jesus for feeling
yeah. I forgot about that.
I mean, that's one other joke, kind of extended toward Jesus, but it's not even it's not at Jesus, it's at the leper's mentality.
Well, yeah,
that he can't see the good in what's happened because it's just
impeded his work.
Yeah, everything he knows about his work. But yeah, so they missed all that, and then they come in to talk about how this movie is degrading to.
Well, yeah, and I guess if you don't see those scenes, you really are more likely to regard this as a film about Christianity.
Yeah. And not just... Yeah. I think the Pythons make a very strong sort of argument in their defense of this to not see it as a movie about Jesus, or necessarily Christianity in a broad sense, but a movie about how Christians act and how organized religion.
Even more than how Christians act. It's just how organized religions, how people who participate in organized religions react and act.
Yeah, but about but at the same time, how Christianity, in its various sects, can argue about all these words of Jesus about spreading love and peace, and eventually get to the point where they're going to war over who's right about how to interpret the message.
Right, but that's again, that's not because they're using Christianity because that's what they know. But that is not a unique phenomenon in Christianity at all.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Because it's what they know, and because it's what they're seeing and what they've grown up with.
Right. It would be offensive and stupid for them to try to do this with Buddhism.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that coin is that because it's what the authors know and therefore how they presented it, it's what the people who take offense know, and therefore can take offense to. So anyway, basically this is an hour-long interview. Little round table.
Is this available on like YouTube or something?
It is available on YouTube.
I will be watching this later.
Check it out. And the Stockwood and Muggeridge take a lot of pot shots at the Pythons, and always cage in, I'm criticizing your movie but not you, sort of things.
It was a simpler time.
Yes. And, they were criticizing them.
I know, but at least they couched it.
Yeah. And the Pythons responding, fairly, you'd expect the comedians to be taking the cheap shots, but they're Oxford educated comedians, so they're quite good at defending what they want to be heard. And ultimately, by the end of the episode, despite the fact that the audience was very much applauding the bishop and Muggeridge at the beginning, by the end of everything, I think they're really on the Cleese and Balance side as far as what it goes. So, listening to them talk about it is, there's an idea in my head that sometimes, the death of authorial intent. I don't want a musician to tell me what their song's about. I don't want a novelist to tell me what their book is about. But at the same time, hearing them tell me why this says what it says is still incredibly, I don't need that to understand, and whatever I get out of it, it's good. But if they are alive and they feel the need to say, this is what it means.
Well,
it's still something to listen to.
It's nice to listen to, but also it's different when you're saying this is what it's about versus this is why this is what this is about.
Yeah.
That's a very different conversation. That's like, what is your movie about versus like Inside the Actor Studio or something like that, where we dig into why does this even exist? Like, and then in those kind of interviews, you end up finding out what the movie is about or the book is about also, but you find out why it's about that thing. And that's always fascinating, I think.
Well, at the same time, with this, though, also, in either case, and they do both, really.
Yeah.
But in either case, Life of Brian wears its themes on its sleeve.
Right.
Like I already said, Brian delivers...
he actually says the theme of the film.
Right in the middle of the film. So it's not exactly out of... It's not uncouth for them to say this is what it's about, because they've already said what it's about. And it's clear that that's what it's about, and anyone who takes anything different from that isn't misunderstanding because it's not clear, but is misunderstanding because they have a prejudice against
right. But I don't want to make this a podcast about authorial intent, but then you do run the risk of getting into a Gulliver's Travels Machiavellian thing where like suddenly people are reading what you've made as because other parties have conspired to change the meaning of it.
Yes.
You are suddenly, everybody's reading what you wrote wrong. And, I mean, yes. There is a certain thing to be said for people trying to, maybe not the author themselves, but other people trying to retroactively fix what was purposely broken. If this movie had been more attacked, let's say if this movie had been made now, God forbid.
Let's say that this movie is The Last Temptation, or that piece of art, the artwork from the late 80s, Piss Christ. You know,
I don't know that one.
Things.
Okay.
Piss Christ is the plastic crucifix submerged in urine.
You know, I've never seen that. I don't know about this thing.
Oh, it was very, very controversial.
Okay. Well,
but the point of those is so easily missed. You know, Last Temptation isn't suggesting that these things are happening. It's suggesting that the Bible even says that Satan tempted him in all ways. So, Last Temptation of Christ is a long dream sequence of one more temptation Christ faced. Of seeing this future with Mary, and we can talk about that when it's in Criterion. Obviously, Piss Christ was all about the commercialization of religion. Piss Christ was made by a very devout Catholic artist, and these little plastic trinkets of his religion that were very clearly existed only so that someone could make money.
Right? Yeah,
and
that
he
makes
didn't
sense.
like that. So it's. There's nothing good about that. It's merde. It's shit. It's raka is a word Jesus uses when talking about the same sort of thing, and it means the same sort of thing. But his intent was so unclear because it's a standalone work of art. It's just art is your reaction to it. So his intent is so easily lost, and everyone else sees Jesus submerged in urine and has an immediate visceral reaction to that being terrible and don't want to think any more deeply about it.
Right, and that's where we get into this thing where, like, take those examples and say, okay, but what I was saying more with, like, The Last Temptation of Christ is actually a better example. If other parties have willfully acted to change the meaning of what you made because they don't like it, then I think authorial intent is an important thing to investigate and to force other parties to actively try to make clear. And that's why I use the examples I use, is because both of those examples are situations where people purposely change the meaning of those works.
We're so far removed from those works.
Right, most people do not know the original intent of to the point where they think that The Prince is a guidebook and that Gulliver's Travels is just a children's book.
Yeah, most people don't know all of Adam Smith's recommendations to avoid corporations.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's this is just a guidebook now, and that's where. In this situation, that's what I mean, is if this movie had been attacked in that way, which I think would be more likely in the current climate than when it was released.
Oh, well, no, it was still.
Well, it was attacked, but I don't think there were people. Well, it depends. I would need to see more concurrent media, but I mean, where people purposely try to change the meaning, where they go around saying this is about Jesus. This is a bad movie about Jesus. Don't see it. Maybe that happened.
A reviewer for the New York Times, I believe it was the New York Times. I may be misremembering his paper, and I'm certainly not going to remember his name. But a conservative leading movie reviewer, who had clearly not seen the movie, described the final scene as Monty Python himself being crucified. Yes. In a parody of the death of Christ. So it's not necessarily willful disinformation. but it's people not seeking out information and allowing themselves to just believe. It's the exact same thing that they're trying to say is bad. It's make up your own mind, work it out for yourself. But these are people, any response is because someone above them said you shouldn't like this because it's bad for this, and this reason. But all they get is I shouldn't like this, and we can parrot their reasons, but we don't understand their reasons. And their reasons aren't really based on anything else. There was a town, I believe, I feel like it was in Wales, that banned showings of Holy Grail, or not Holy Grail, of Life of Brian. There were no movie theaters in its jurisdiction anyway.
Love that.
So it's just
right.
It's
well, so I guess maybe because of the way that this film is obvious to anybody who, because as you said, it wears its themes on its sleeve.
Watches it and thinks about it.
Yeah, if you don't even have to think that hard.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the difference, is that because the satire is not buried, the authorial intent is maybe less necessary.
Yeah.
But I'm not always. My point is this: I'm not always against it. And if you're around as the author to argue, I guess there's a difference between arguing with people who interpret your movie different and then people who attack your movie.
Yeah. So. And there's always the great jokes. It was used in Annie Hall. It was used in Rodney Dangerfield's Back to School. I think is what it was. The stuffy intellectual who is explaining the work of some artist, and then our main character says, well, I know this guy, and brings him in and says, no, you're wrong. That's not what I meant at all. So there's a place in our culture when we have a living artist to say that and to correct misinterpretations. But what's it? The Jungle. The Jungle was a socialist screed.
Well,
but all the American public got out of it was that they need to start actually watching what goes into their meat.
Well, but if you, well, for me, I read it as both, and I like it as both. It's better that way.
Well, yeah,
and so again, authorial intent can add to your enjoyment, but at the same time, again, I don't want to be told that I have to take it, this way.
Yeah, that's the other half is. Sometimes
don't tell me what
the authors are wrong about what they mean.
Well, and I can agree with that too, right? Like you write a book, and the author thinks they were writing about this, but they were actually writing about this. Yeah, and I can believe that too.
And even if it's if they very clearly thought and presented an idea, I can still take other things from that,
right? And
have those other things be more important.
Well, and that. Oh man, we are so off the rails. But it feels a little.
This is a conversation.
But the other thing though is, and the reason I believe that's one of the reasons that's the case is because an author is a product of a life and a society and a culture. The themes that they include are not always just the themes that they think they're including. They include themes because they're human beings that they can't help but include. And then when we dig deeper into it, we find those themes and explore them. Yeah. And so actually, believe it or not, if you go to Amazon, I was looking up The Life of Brian, and there's a whole bunch of papers on it that investigate various elements of it that are not the main topic.
Yeah.
About the modern people's interpretations of ancient Rome and things like that are also elements of the film. Because they are modern people trying to recreate Rome in a comedy, what things do they do that are a product of their beliefs about what Rome was like? Interesting elements like that you can dig into. But that's not their main intent of the movie, but that is one of the things that is in the movie.
But to a certain extent, that is partially an intent of the movie.
Well,
that scene with I can't even keep the revolutionary group names.
Which one? Okay, are we talking about the one Brian's in, or
the main one? The one that Brian is in before Brian joins. Reg is John Cleese's character is talking to them and says, well, what good have the Romans ever done for this? For
right,
us?
That's true. They do dig
roads,
into it a little bit. Yeah. Did
you
say the aquabats?
The aquabats, the roads, the aqueduct, the public health, and you can argue that yes, that was increased under Rome, but the Persians built the roads. They may have brought the aqueducts, but the public health, I mean, the Jewish law was partially about public health.
And exactly.
So there was that stuff was already there too. So you can't.
But in other areas, that could be much more firmly argued. If you dig further up into Europe rather than east, it's much more the case that they built the roads, they built the aqueducts, they brought public health, they brought blah blah blah.
They brought civilization to them, whether they wanted it or not.
And and then you get into discussions of whether or not they reaped benefits from it or not. And I mean, there's a lot of. But that's it can be discussed.
That's a good discussion point from and the movie takes up with that, and and then ultimately, well, we don't care. We want to be
right. Accepting the following.
Another jab.
Which is a jab at a totally different topic, which is one of the main topics, which is revolutionaries in general.
Yeah, revolutionaries and the. What was the name of the group that was just the one old man?
It was the popular front.
Yes,
of Judea or something like that. Which is it's supposed to be a joke, right? I guess because he's the one guy and it's popular.
Yeah. Cleese talks about this whole idea stemming from a pamphlet he got written by Stalinists attacking Trotskyism.
Wow.
This whole you put yourselves down into this one pigeonhole, and then you spend more energy establishing and attacking the differences between you and the group right next to you,
which is great. And the best example of that element is in the tunnel underneath the thing where he's like. We got to focus on our common enemy, and whatever it is. Like, you mean
the People's Judean Front?
Yeah, the People's Judean Front. It's like no, the Romans.
You idiots!
It's beautiful.
And that is something that holds as satire of political groups as much as it holds a satire of religious groups.
Which is why it's a great thing to include in
because it's a satire of groups in general. It's a satire of tribalism. We establish our differences just to have an us versus them, and we are so intent on that we can't see the similarities for what they are, and instead want to always attack to say we're different, even when we should be fighting a common enemy, and there's especially in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s. Even today, but maybe even today, but I'm kind of out of that culture at this point. But there is, within Christianity, a very big, Protestants not only want to separate themselves from each other, but, there's the Protestants who believe Catholics aren't going to heaven. There's the Protestants who believe that Catholics are really a cult.
Right, and then there's even the crazy ones who think that, Yeah. Well, I mean, but there's Catholics are lizard people or something weird like that. But
they all believe that there's a lot of Protestant groups that believe that their Protestant group is the only ones, not only the only ones who got it right, but the only ones who are going to gain any reward from having it right. And since ultimately Christianity, at least in my view, and I'll cage it like that, even though I feel this is 100% true. It's just my belief. I'll admit that. But ultimately, Christianity is not about the rewards anyway. Christianity is about the banding together to better society through love, through grace, through charity and compassion. And that's what ostensibly what the leftist political groups want to do, and what any group wants to do is to better society in however they define bettering society. So, we get into the infighting, which goes exactly dead set against that betterment. Right. Because it's infighting. Infighting never leads to betterment. Infighting is itself just worsening things. No, I can't say never, because eventually infighting grows to a moving force to change big social ills, and that's needed. Without ideological infighting, we'd never gotten rid of slavery in the U.S.
Right. I mean, it is true that it does sometimes reduce.
Yeah. Evolution. At the same time, that was when people when the abolitionists who thought slaves should be free, and the abolitionists who thought slaves should be citizens, and the abolitionists who thought
slaves should be in Liberia.
Yeah, should be sent back to Liberia. All decided to get together and just stop slavery instead.
Yeah, like maybe we should do step 1 first before we start arguing about steps 2 through 10. Yes. But I mean, and that's. Well, and that's the one part that we don't really touch on in this movie, is that next step after, we spend 100 years fighting about this, and then eventually a couple people who don't have their heads in their asses, or maybe just not quite as far up there, decide that maybe we should actually do something first.
Yeah, but it's not funnier when people actually it's funnier to focus on the... and that's what satire is.
Right. It's to remind us of these kind of things.
This is where the problem is. Yeah.
And it does an incredibly good job. It's a great movie.
Oh, yeah, it does.
And it's a shame that it's not... I don't encounter it a lot, honestly. Like, a lot of people will talk about the Holy Grail, but, like, you don't hear people talking that much. I guess maybe because when you're 13 years old, this is not that interesting. Yeah,
this is a heavier movie. Like the people we know who got into Python saw the Holy Grail and thought it was silly. Saw the parrot sketch, And there's actually, in response to that Friday night, Saturday morning interview, the very next week, not the 9 o'clock news, which was a sort of Daily Show-esque. The Daily Show owes a lot to not the 9 o'clock news, but it was that current events comedy. Rowan Atkinson was on it, and they did a sketch the next week where a guy was on complaining about a new movie that the Church of England had produced called Jesus Christ, or The Life of Jesus, I think. I think it was actually just Life, and Jesus Christ, it wasn't quite. And there's a guy on complaining that was clearly an attack on the Church of Python, the established religion of Britain. In this day and age, how anyone could not see that. Jesus Christ, John Cleese, clearly, they even have the same initials. But they talk about, and there's one line, our as you know, our Lord... Our Lord Jesus, our Lord John Cleese has said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered, so shall they perform the dead parrot sketch." And that's the sort of environment that our love of Monty Python, I think, came out of. It's people who felt like
and then the people, and like people quoting the Holy Grail,
quoting,
and that's why I feel really happy that I watched it again now as a full-grown adult. This is way better.
Yes.
And it's like...
This is a movie that is funny and poignant.
Yeah, it's like actually really enjoyable from a narrative sense, is enjoyable from a satirical sense, is also got silly stuff in it, which is also nice.
Yeah. And there's a lot of Python sketches that are like that, like the philosophers playing soccer sketch is it's on its surface it's silly, but there's deeper jokes, and that's sort of weird. It's like Gulliver's Travels, like you mentioned. It's in one way marketed as a kid's adventure book, but it's also this really deep thing. And reading as a kid, it's an adventure book with a whole lot of boring parts.
Yeah, and not a very good children's adventure book. Yeah. Well, but but the main thing about that was never meant to be that way.
Yeah.
Whereas the Monty Python stuff that is silly was always meant to be silly.
Yeah, that is true.
I mean, not to nitpick, but you know what I mean. Like their silly stuff is literally meant to be silly. And sometimes they meld the two. And then you get confused 13-year-olds.
Yes.
But, like, other times, it's just silly. For silly's sake.
Yeah.
Because they're also comedians, and sometimes it's just fun to be silly.
Yeah. And, Holy Grail was silly for silly's sake. And Brian has moments of it, but ultimately is silly for the sake of trying to say something. And, the meaning of life tries to say something to an extent, but it's mostly just silly.
Yeah, I don't remember the meaning of life very well, so...
You give and take on that. Yeah.
Like, I haven't revisited Monty Python in a long time because I had kind of sequestered it in my mind as silly stuff. Yeah. So it was very nice to see it and go, wait a minute, this isn't...
To remember that these are really smart guys.
Yeah, well, and to just investigate it in a way, because, like, you can try to remember what you saw when you were 13 years old and think, like, maybe there was some deeper stuff in there. But then, like, you don't remember it very clearly because it was, however many years ago that was.
Yeah.
And then it's really nice to, do it again. Kind of almost fresh without the preconceptions. Kind of ignore the preconceptions of childhood and try it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt that way about some of the other things we have watched. Not necessarily the preconceptions of childhood, but we watched another movie, I can't remember what it was, that I had watched in college, and I had kind of liked it. I can't remember what movie it was.
I don't
know. Yeah, it's been too many at this point. But the point is, this was a very rewarding experience for me.
Yeah. Well, it's a rewarding experience for everyone who actually watches it. Not expecting to be offended.
Well, but also I think anybody who watches it as an adult. I think that's a big part of it, because like when you're 13 years old, you like a thing, so you go find all the things of that thing that you can find. Yeah. And then you're like, if you sit down and try to watch this one, you go, man, this is not what?
Yeah.
So.
And at the same time, one thing that in the Friday night, Saturday morning interview that Cleese and Palin both reiterate over and over again is, that while the idea here is to make up your own mind and work it out for yourself, if the working out for yourself leads you back to, Jesus, back to the religion, that's fine too.
Right, yeah. They never say don't be religious, don't be and they don't even, they do the same. They don't even do that with the radical groups either. They say...
Yeah, this isn't a movie about atheism or even agnosticism. This is a movie about thinking for yourself. And whatever conclusions you reach thinking for yourself, that's cool.
Yeah.
But just don't accept a thing because someone else believes it or because a whole bunch of other people believe it.
Yeah, don't believe it because you're told to believe it. Believe it because you have a good reason to. No, it's
even if that reason is just because you want to,
right?
But still, you don't need a good reason, but at least actively make a decision to believe it instead of just accepting it, which I think is a really good way to approach any philosophy, religion, political belief.
It's just generally a good way to approach life.
It's a good way to approach life. Yes. I had a guy this week, actually, a guy who works with me. So he was surprised about how I reacted to something because he always considered me a skeptic. And it got me thinking. I am religious. I am Christian. I'm very religious, but I'm not what people like this guy view as religious, which is the sort of people complaining about Life of Brian before they've even seen it. So he's skeptic now has this baggage of free thinker, of agnostic atheist alliance stuff.
Well, and it has that baggage because in a lot of ways, I think now we're getting kind of into a different topic, but in that it has been given that baggage.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily been given that baggage by the atheist and like the atheists Association of America or whatever, I forget what it's called.
Yeah,
didn't give it that baggage. People who decided to use skeptic as a pejorative gave it that baggage, which is unfortunate because there has been a long tradition in a lot of faiths, including the Christian faith, of reasoning about your religion.
Yeah,
that is not so popular right now.
Even in the same way, and this is getting more popular. I think within Christianity, there is a problem in recent decades of ideologues instead of theologians.
Yeah.
And that gets really problematic really fast. But there are still people, today who think about.
Well, I mean, there are still
people,
theologians. I mean, they still exist,
and they're still theologians. They still exist. But no, you're certainly right. But
they're on the History Channel all the time.
there's a problem with and the mentality that this movie is attacking is part of this. Another part of it is the sequestering of doubt, the inability to not know a thing. We not only have to have an answer for everything, but we have to be right. And even if we're not right, we have to know that we're right. Even if we're clearly wrong, we have to know that we're right. Kirk Cameron has a movie coming out in which he claims to once and for all put the nail in the coffin to state why God allows evil to happen.
Wow.
Kirk Cameron has a film coming out where he solves the one philosophical problem that has plagued humanity since there was humanity.
Yeah, ever since somebody created the concept of God, or God created himself, or whatever, has existed as long as people
ever
have
since
been
a
cognitive.
Man has said there's a God, another man has said, well, then why is there pain?
And then Kirk Cameron's
decided he's finally solved that.
Well, it's all his, and then I'm blanking on what movie, on what TV show he was on, but...
Oh, Growing Pains?
It's all his experience on Growing Pains. He knows about pain.
He knows about pain because of Growing Pains.
And also probably the Left Behind series that didn't...
But at the same time.
That probably taught him a lot about pain, too. Those are not good movies.
Yes, I'm sure those are not good. Those are not good books. Have you ever actually...
I have both read the first book and watched the first movie.
Yeah. They are brutal. Like Rayford Steele, Buck Rogers. They all sound like really bad porn names.
Is that the name? I don't remember. This is a long time ago. What is the name of the characters?
Buck Rogers is the reporter who Kirk Cameron plays. Rayford Steele is the pilot who's the main character.
Man, so it's not... I don't remember, because I read these in junior high school, okay? When they were really sweeping through youth groups.
Yeah.
And, I kind of ignored them, because whatever. I was not exactly hunting for good stories. But, man, that's just bad writing.
Yeah, it's really bad writing. It's really terrible writing.
We're getting beyond religious doctrine. Just don't do a crappy job at your job.
Exactly.
Don't be a writer if you're a crappy writer.
Yeah. Thanks, Pat.
I'm not talking to you.
Oh, well, thanks, Pat.
I mean, in general, to people. If the best name you can come up with is Rayford Steele and Buck Rogers, quit.
Yeah.
Or just look in a phone book.
Now that I think about it, it's probably not Buck Rogers.
I really hope it is Buck Rogers. Because that's even better since that's already taken.
Yeah. I keep saying it. But it is Buck. It's Buck something.
Oh, it doesn't matter then. If you named your character Buck, and it's supposed to be set in the modern era, try again.
It's not working. But yeah.
Although I do love the fact that Brian's name is Brian, which is totally asynchronous, totally out of sync. Well, it's wonderful.
They're asked about that before the other folks arrive in that Friday night interview. They're asked about naming him Brian, and they said there's always been just among them, and it's like Trevor. It's just this.
It's just a name that's funny to them.
It's just the people named Brian, they're just normal. There's nothing really exemplary.
Well, it works in the movie because Brian to us is a super normal name.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.
I mean, it could, and also it's not specifically the name of any prophet or that era biblical person, which is helpful because to me, I would have you could name him John, but then that is problematic.
Yeah. Yes. There was an idea during writing that Brian should be a 13th apostle who is always just like 5 minutes late to everything.
That would actually also be a funny movie, but
yeah. So he he wrote his gospel, but he did it like on his deathbed, so no one read it. He was late to turning them in.
Right? Yeah, he didn't turn his homework in on time.
Yeah. So, but yeah, which would be an interesting idea for a movie too. But I like how it ended.
This
really quite good.
The final iteration of this is quite enjoyable.
Yeah.
Wow, we got so philosophical in this episode.
Well, this was a good episode to get philosophical because otherwise we would have just been saying, "Hey, I love this movie."
No, but I'm surprised because we didn't do as good a job. We've gotten better at this.
We're getting better at our podcast, Pat.
Yeah, it only took 61 episodes for us not to just talk about how much we love it. Let's go back and do Tiny Bandits again.
Maybe we should. Has it posted already? I think it's posted.
Yeah,
already,
then it's too late.
Alas. Anyway, thank you once again for listening to Lost in Criterion. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. Hope you enjoyed the movie as much as we did. Because if you don't enjoy Life of Brian,
we don't want to be your friend.
No, we can be friends with idiots.
They're not going to be our friends anyway, Adam. You just called them idiots.
Shh! Don't tell them. They may not have noticed. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
What's the next movie?
I'm about to.
Oh, well, I thought you were closing the way you said it. Like I was getting ready to see you next time, and then I was going to click the stop button.
We'll see you next time when we discuss Carl Theodor Dreyer's The Passion of Joan of Arc from 1928, French movie. More reading. So.
No, I've seen it.
Have you?
Yeah.
I haven't. So
it's pretty short if memory serves. So.
Yeah, 82 minutes according to what I'm looking at right now. Thank you once again for listening. We'll see you next time.
Yep, see you next time.
Have a good week. You've been listening to Lost in Criterion, a production of With Two Brains. The show is hosted by Adam Glass and John Patrick Owatari Dorgan. Jonathan Hape did the music, and Adam Glass also edited it all together. Feel free to contact us by email via lostincriterion@withtwobrains.com or join us on the web at www.lostincriterion.com.